Welcome to the group here in the library. Nice to see everybody. We got a great presentation here tonight about some very important birds. And afterwards, we'll have a very quick, not even really a meeting. I'm going to have a number of announcements, just quick ones, but and Chance is welcome to stay. Maybe we'll get you to join Williamsburg Bird Club. Sounds so much fun. So I'm going to let Patty go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight. And then after that, we'll have a quick meeting. So welcome, everybody. Happy to have you.
Well, I'm excited that we got Chance Hines to join us tonight. He is a research biologist with the Center for Conservation Biology at William and Mary, and will share the historic and current status of the only federally endangered woodpecker in North America. Following Chance's graduate degree in ODU, where he studied migrating songbirds on the Eastern Shore, he began working with the CCB. Although Chance works on various avian research projects involving songbirds, shorebirds, eagles, and rails, he is focused on and in charge of monitoring the northernmost population of the red-cockaded woodpeckers located in the Nature Conservancy's Piney Grove Preserve in Sussex County, Virginia. So I'm like, enjoying it. Come on in, Chance.
All right, thank you for the intro. I'll go ahead and share my content.
Yeah, it's
Screen?
your screen.
All right.
Hit start broadcast. Guy's pro.
All
He
right.
is a pro. He's hired. And then swipe up to Zoom again.
We need to actually go to your PowerPoint.
There we go. All right.
Can you see that at home there, Ann?
This should be good.
Y'all see the screen?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, good to go.
All right, thank you for the intro. Like you said, I'm Chance Hines. I work for the Center for Conservation Biology here in Williamsburg for the college. And one of the projects that I spend a lot of time on is managing the RCW populations here in Virginia. And that stands for Red-cockaded Woodpecker. Oh, yes.
Is it turned on?
It is. I can, maybe I can turn it up or something.
Turn it up so you may have to get closer to it.
Yeah, I'll just speak a little louder. How's that? There we go. Yeah, so throughout the presentation, I'll say RCW because it's a lot easier than red-cockaded woodpecker. But first of all, okay, it's white. I got it.
Just click on it.
Oh, okay. So you got to go to the right side. Red-cockaded woodpeckers, they're most easily identified by the big white cheek on the side of the face there. You can see number 1 on that plate. That's the woodpeckers of Eastern North America. The only ones you really would probably get them confused with are downy woodpeckers, which you will sometimes see them foraging together, and they're just about the same size. So you'll see a woodpecker up in a tree and think it's an RCW, but sometimes it will be a downy. The RCWs, they have that real clear white cheek patch, and their back is also barred. And you can see that's different than just about all the other woodpeckers. Sapsuckers and red bellies have that, but they're pretty easily distinguished. The vocalizations are also quite different than the other woodpeckers. Within the RCWs, the males and females, they are a little bit different, but you usually won't see this. The males have this red cockade. There you can see on the picture. They usually only flash this little red patch on their head whenever they're agitated about another woodpecker or a predator or something like that that's in the habitat with them. So it's pretty rare to see that. I only see maybe a handful of those a year when I'm looking at hundreds of birds. That cockade, it comes from a little patch that military people and other kind of respected officials in 1700s, they used to wear those on their hat. So you can see it's very similar, that just little bitty red patch. There are some other differences between the males and females. Males generally will stick to kind of the outermost branches of trees when they're foraging and the uppermost, whereas females will stick closer to the trunk of the tree and a little bit lower down. This isn't a hard rule, but generally this is how they'll forage. As I mentioned, their plumage is slightly different. Their foraging behavior is a little bit different, but as far as reproductive behavior goes, of course, the female lays the eggs, but both the male and the female will incubate. But there's one particular aspect of RCW biology that makes them pretty unique, and that's that they are cooperative breeders. There will be multiple males and females that feed the young. A lot of these are not related at all to the breeding pair. And as far as woodpeckers go, there's another species of North American woodpecker that is a cooperative breeder, the acorn woodpecker. Those woodpeckers, they'll have multiple females lay eggs in the same cavity and sometimes multiple males. RCWs aren't known to do that. They typically just have a breeding pair, and then everybody else just helps feed the nestlings. And they stick to a cluster of trees. We use the term cluster because, as you see on this map, those dots represent trees that have cavities in them, and they like to stay close together. So some of these clusters of birds or groups of birds that raise their young together. At Piney Grove, which is the population I work the most in Virginia, they will have anywhere between 2 and 9 individuals in a group. So you have to have a lot of trees in this group to support those birds. That particular image there on the left, that's showing the green dots represent trees that woodpeckers are actively using, whereas the yellow ones, there's some uncertainty. Maybe the woodpeckers use them sometimes, but not others. And then the red dots are trees that have been used in the past, but for one reason or another are no longer used. At Piney Grove and throughout the range, the trees will be marked. There you can see that picture on the right with those stripes of spray paint that make it much easier when you're walking through the woods to locate those trees. There's also a tag on that tree you would need really good eyes to see, and it'll have a number on it. And that's the number at Piney Grove. It's sequential. I think we're at 350 or so trees that have been created through the years. And these cavities that the woodpeckers create sometimes take a very long time to create, up to 10 years. And that's because RCWs, they drill through the living wood on the outside of the tree, whereas most woodpeckers take advantage of dead trees to create cavities. So you can excavate dead wood a lot faster than you can drilling through this living wood. These are 2 examples of starts, is what we call them. Sometimes they can get this far in a few months. Sometimes it can take years, even just to drill into the trees. And occasionally they'll start a tree like this and then just give up for a little while. Once they get the cavity complete, they drill sap wells in the area surrounding that cavity entrance. You can see all the white substance surrounding that cavity. That's all tree sap. And it's thought they do this to keep predators from trying to access their cavities. You know, if you're a snake, which commonly climb up these trees, black rat snakes, you don't want to climb into this really sticky substance that it's really terrible to get off your hands. You have to wash them quite vigorously, and snakes aren't going to be doing that. Flying squirrels are another example of an animal that would like to use that cavity, but this sap really discourages that. And there you can see kind of a close-up of a sap well on the right. As far as which trees the woodpeckers select to drill their cavities into, on the broad scale, they like very mature trees, larger trees, typically older trees. They don't like a mid-story, so a lot of hardwoods and stuff surrounding those trees, very thick woods. They're not going to like that kind of forest because these branches that are in smaller trees that are still relatively tall, you know, about halfway up these pine trees, that makes it a lot easier for flying squirrels, for example, to access the cavity. So they generally won't live in forests that are real thick. For the same reason, they typically drill their cavities below the first branch. They don't like having a cavity up in the crown of the tree because there's a lot of branches. It makes it a lot easier to access that cavity. One detail of the trees that they typically select is the trees have this fungus called a red heart fungus, and it's a disease. And what the red heart fungus does is, as the tree ages, that fungus gets into the interior of the tree and it rots the inside. And once that inside is rotted, it makes it a lot easier for the woodpeckers to, once they penetrate through that living outer part of the tree, they can get to that rotten part, and it's a lot easier to drill through that and excavate the cavity. Something that's kind of interesting is trees that they start on that don't have red heart. Sometimes the woodpeckers will actually infect the trees because they'll work on one tree that has the red heart fungus and they get spores on their bill. They'll take that spores to the tree they're working on, and over time, those spores will germinate or, you know, turn into full-grown fungus.
Is that you up on the tree?
Yeah, I believe that is me up on the tree. On the right tree there, you see that growth, the red heart fungus. Once it gets mature, that's the fruiting body. So that's like the mushroom that comes out of the tree. And before that fungus creates the fruiting body, it's pretty hard to tell that it has red heart. But once you see that, you know the tree is diseased.
So back to that, do you burn that forest floor to keep the vegetation?
Right. So especially here in Virginia, things grow really vigorously. They grow very fast. In other areas where red-cockadeds are, it'll be very nutrient poor soil, so the trees will grow really slowly. But here you can see that forest floor is just really lush and green, and that's fine. But once those trees get 20 to 30 feet high, it starts to become a problem for the woodpeckers. So at Piney Grove, where I work a lot, they typically burn every 3 years or so everywhere. It's not all at once, they'll burn patches, but they try to burn every 2 to 3 years. These cavities take a long time to create, and a lot of these trees with the cavities can fall down, and sometimes a lot of them will fall down at once, especially following a hurricane in coastal areas, which happens sometimes. I think Isabel maybe came through here quite a while back, and Piney Grove lost a lot of trees during that time. You can see where the cavity is. It's in the middle of the tree. You can imagine hollowing out the middle of a tree isn't going to be very good for the tree either. So generally, the trees with cavities are more susceptible to snapping at the cavity also. So these woodpeckers are kind of making these trees less likely to survive. But that is what is kind of behind the decline of the woodpeckers. They just can't create trees fast enough to make up for the loss of trees. Of course, there's also other things that are getting their cavities. Here we have a black rat snake actually climbing the tree. I've never actually seen a rat snake climbing a tree, but I've seen quite a few in cavities. I would really like to see that. But that's not uncommon to see rat snakes in trees. As I mentioned, the sap keeps them out of most of the active trees. So a lot of the times when I see rat snakes in trees, it's in trees that haven't been used in quite a while. Flying squirrels, that's another species that uses a lot of these tree cavities. You can see there on the left, the cavity with that squirrel just looking out, real cute. They will really gnaw away at the edges and make that cavity entrance quite a bit larger. And the woodpeckers don't like that. So a lot of times they'll abandon that cavity. And again, most of the cavities that I find flying squirrels in are cavities that aren't being used. So it's generally not a huge deal that these flying squirrels are in the same habitat. And then other species of woodpeckers. Red bellies, flickers will use RCW cavities. Pileated woodpeckers are really one of the species that causes the most damage to active cavities. For some reason, they really like to, what we call blow them out. So if you have an RCW cavity, they'll go to that cavity and just peck it repeatedly until that entrance gets really big. And there on the right, you can see that's a cavity that's been blown out, and that woodpecker's just looking at it. But they can do this really quickly too. Pileated woodpecker can do multiple cavities in a day. Here we have a restrictor plate on the right. If a cavity does get blown out, that is a method we can use to reduce the size of that entrance again so that the RCWs can use it. But the main reason the woodpeckers became cavity limited and their population declined quite a bit throughout the 1900s and apparently late 1800s more than likely is because of the logging. Longleaf pine is a high value tree for a variety of reasons, but it got logged out throughout the southeastern United States in a lot of areas. And this figure, you can see the historic range of the RCWs, which it contracted quite a bit, and also the historic range of longleaf pine, which is only really found in pockets throughout the southeast at this point. You can see last records there on the left. RCWs were being extirpated from different states into the 2000s. At this point, they are actually increasing in numbers, which we'll see in a little bit. Here's an example of some really nice longleaf pines that have been sawed down. Here's the graph of up to the mid 2010s. You see up into the late 70s is really where the population hit their lowest numbers, and then they've been increasing ever since that, and that's for a variety of reasons. They got put on the endangered species list, of course, and that resulted in a lot of funding going into creating RCW habitat. Two management techniques that are really used to increase the habitat are forest thinning, which you can see there. This forest was much too thick at first. You can see surrounding this area, all those trees are just everywhere, a lot of hardwoods. And then they just cut those down to make it much thinner. And that's what the RCWs really like. But once you thin it out, you have to burn to make sure those trees stay down. So those are the two big time things that you do to the actual landscape. The cavity management, that is what has really increased the numbers of RCWs throughout the range, because they were always, it took so long to create these cavities naturally. Once biologists figured out how to create a cavity that they will use, they can just go and install hundreds of cavities. For example, after hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast, it knocked down 30% of their cavity trees in these coastal populations. Biologists just went and installed a whole bunch of artificial cavities. I actually have one of these cavities here with me. Here, for those of you at home, you can see this cavity. It's just a box. And what biologists will do is they climb the tree and use a chainsaw to create a little pattern that they can knock out. And then they take this insert and just stick it in there. And you can see some biologists doing this. Then you put putty around that insert to make it look smooth. And you see the white spray paint that's on here too. This actually came out of a tree at the Dismal Swamp that fell down, and I just pulled the cavity out. That white spray paint is meant to simulate sap flow. And you can actually see on this picture that the biologists have kind of drilled or chipped away at the tree to stimulate sap flow. It's hoping that the woodpeckers will see that white paint and think it's already got sap and just go ahead and use it. And it works. As far as Virginia goes, it's much the same story. Most of Virginia's longleaf pine was logged before we even knew how many RCWs were here. RCWs, it's not well known how widely distributed they were here in Virginia. You can see in this map where we do know, basically throughout Southeast Virginia, and then even a couple counties up in the mountains. So you think if you have populations up in these mountains, they were probably more widely distributed than just this. It's just that before the trees were gone, nobody was looking for red-cockaded woodpeckers. There was a forester in the 50s who actually documented where the red-cockaded woodpeckers were, because he noticed that, you know, these forests where only the species is found are just disappearing because their trees are too valuable. At that time, he found about 20 clusters of birds throughout the state. Then in the 1970s, Mitchell Bird, who is a retired professor here at William Mary, and he helped found the Center for Conservation Biology, which I work for. He did a survey and located 23 active clusters. A lot of these were not the clusters that Steerley had found, because a lot of those had disappeared, but he found new ones that Steerley never found. By 2002, logging continued in Virginia, and there we got down to 2 pairs. At this point, the Nature Conservancy had purchased some land, which became Piney Grove, and they started managing it very intensely for red-cockaded woodpeckers. Talk a little bit about Piney Grove now. It's in Sussex County. Here you can see the map, fairly close to us. I take the ferry real early in the morning to get over there, and then it's about a 40-minute drive once you cross the ferry. Here you can see from the vantage point of a cavity, the habitat there at Piney. This is all burned within a week or so. So it's nice and brown, crisp, not any understory. Here you can see the following year. This is not the same cluster, but generally this is what it looks like. You'll get some grasses close to the ground. Those are a lot of sweet gum and red maple coming up, those little shrubby things. And then 2 to 3 years later, it's quite a bit shrubbier. And there's a lot of pepper bush in here. It smells really nice in the spring when it's all blooming. There's also a lot of greenbrier and rubus. It's not so fun to walk through. A lot of ticks in the summer, but that's why I like it when they burn it. It makes everything much easier. But this is about as thick as it gets before they'll burn it again. So it's not too bad. And of course, bigwoods. You see that red area or the yellow area there at the top, that's Piney Grove Preserve. Bigwoods WMA and Bigwoods State Forest are both there south of Piney Grove. And those areas were purchased by the state in hopes of future forests becoming RCW habitat. The forest was too young. They didn't anticipate birds moving in anytime soon. But RCWs did actually find a few trees that were big enough to support cavities, and RCWs moved in on their own. And if you go out there, you can go to the Red-cockaded Woodpecker area, and they have a little display near the cavity tree, and you can sit out there and watch for the birds. This is actually one of the breeders. They've bred there for 3 years now. This will be the 4th year. And this past year was the first year they successfully produced young that fledged. So that was a big step for them, and they're very excited about that. And there's actually another population here. As some of you were talking about the Great Dismal Swamp. And there's an area in the swamp called the Blocks where they have cleared some habitat. So the swamp can be very thick with trees. We talked about how some of these areas, they clear some of the trees to make it a little bit better habitat for the birds. You can see here, it's quite a bit more clear than Piney Grove. So they're actually hurting for cavities in this area. You can imagine the wind going through this area. It gets pretty strong down there. A lot of thunderstorms in the summer, late summer especially, blow through there, and the wind gets really very strong wind because there's no trees blocking it. So they actually have quite a few trees snap. Like I said, I got that artificial cavity out of one that had snapped. Some places are very pretty down there. You can see this is some nice blue stem. This is one area that's really nice habitat. But it can be very swampy. You can see sometimes we're walking through pretty deep water. The soils at Piney Grove or at Dismal Swamp are all peat. So you can get some very soft soil. Even when it dries out, it's just muck. Sometimes you can sink up to your hips, and it's not very fun. And it's a lot longer walks to the locations where the woodpeckers are. At Great Dismal Swamp, almost all the clusters, the birds are dependent on these artificial cavities. And there's several clusters that were created, most of them right by the road. But the ones that require a 20-minute hike to get in are the ones where the woodpeckers really like. So we're always hiking a long way with ladders. As far as the Great Dismal Swamp goes, this population didn't start like Piney Grove, where there was an established breeding pair or two. All the birds at Great Dismal Swamp were brought there or offspring of birds that were brought there in translocations. And when we do translocations, we do this from populations that are very productive. Piney Grove contributes birds to Great Dismal Swamp on years that they do translocations, because Piney Grove often produces more birds than they can handle with the available habitat. So it's a good place to take a couple birds. Carolina Sandhills, Francis Marion National Forest down in the Carolinas are also places that a lot of birds have come from. When we do these translocations, you can see there's a extending pole with a net on it, and you wait till the evening times when the birds come back to their cavity to roost for the night. And as soon as they go in, you put that net up to their cavity and bang on the tree, and hopefully the bird flies out in the net. Then you immediately transport them to the swamp. And for some of these places, it takes a while, and it's the middle of the night, 2 or 3 a.m. by the time the bird gets there. And then you climb up the tree and put that bird into the cavity. Here's a good photo of us putting a bird in the cavity. Once you put the bird in there, the bird would just fly out because it's not like the bird's sleeping. So we have to put a screen over the entrance, and you can see there's a parachute cord on that screen that goes down to the ground. Some of you may have helped out with this before, I'm not sure. But in the morning at sunrise, which is when RCWs come out and begin foraging, you pull that string and it'll pull that screen off, and the birds come out and start foraging. Usually you put a couple birds right next to each other and you pull their screens and they just meet up and start foraging, even if they didn't come from the same location. It's really neat to see them do that. So we put about 50 birds in the swamp. Throughout the years, some have stuck around, some have bred. There's currently about 10 to 15 birds down there. So this follows the general trend throughout the entire Southeast, where the RCWs kind of bottomed out and then increased. They've increased quite a bit here in Virginia over the last 20 years or so. We're currently at about 20 pairs, and we're down to 2 in the early 2000s. So it's definitely a success story down here. Now, as far as what I actually do, this is a thing for biologists. You see this quite a bit. Nobody really understands what biologists do, but there on the bottom right, that's really what we're doing most of the time, is just taking notes, writing in our notebook. But one of the tools I use for RCWs quite a bit is a peeper camera. And this is a modified baby camera that uses basically Bluetooth to transmit image from that camera there to that viewer. The camera is 3D printed. There's just one guy in the United States that makes these for all the woodpecker biologists. There's me with my peeper. I use an extendable pole. That pole will go up to 50 feet. Typically, that's used by electrical linemen to access transformers. And I'm lifting that pole into a cavity. Here's another view. That's the view from the camera looking down. And once I get the camera into the cavity, it's always exciting to see what I can find. This is a clean cavity. This is used by a red-cockaded woodpecker on a nightly basis. This is what you hope for, just a very clean cavity. Looks nice. Sometimes you'll see a reflection of your light, and that's because there's water in the cavity. Not all of these woodpeckers make the smartest decisions about where to place their cavity. So if a storm blows the right way, you'll end up with water. This particular cavity, every year or two, you'll get strong winds in a storm and it'll fill with water. But once it dries out, the woodpeckers start using it again. Some of these cavities get real moldy after they get wet like this, and they won't be used again. But this particular one goes on and off. Sometimes you'll see a bunch of pine needles. This is from a flying squirrel. More than likely a male or a group of males. A lot of times you'll find more than one together. Here's a flying squirrel in a cavity. And here's some baby flying squirrels. You'll see the bottom of this cavity, the substrate is quite a bit different. The females, for nesting, they'll actually use grasses and chew that up and make it really soft. So you can tell if it's a male squirrel or a female squirrel using the cavity. And then here's a black rat snake. As I mentioned, you'll see those in cavities. Every year I have 1 or 2 cavities with a black rat snake. This year I had a black rat snake in a cavity that was a squirrel nest. So I don't know if the snake got the squirrels or what, but they weren't there. This is actually a frog. This is a gray tree frog. We have a couple species in Virginia. I'm not sure which one it is, but I don't think this has been documented before. So this is pretty interesting. You see a lot of insects. These are beetles, wood roaches, and you'll see flies and other flying insects. But if you look to the left there, you'll see some mud dauber tubes. Mud dauber tubes aren't a big problem at Piney Grove. There might be 2 or 3 cavities that mud daubers start using. And usually it's just a couple tubes like this. Woodpeckers can peck this off if they want to start using a cavity. But an insect that Great Dismal Swamp has a lot of problems with are the mud dauber tubes, mud daubers, but also these are paper wasps. So the Great Dismal Swamp, you saw those photos earlier, how it's very open and wet. So there's a lot of mud there. And these wasps, they really like open spaces. So it's really the perfect habitat for them. And because they've cleared out all the hardwoods and there's very few trees, these wasps during the winter, the pregnant females, will hibernate essentially. And they hibernate in these aggregations. And at the Great Dismal Swamp, it's actually a pretty bad problem. One year, it's like a quarter or a third of the cavities had these aggregations in them. Here's another one. These wasps were a little aggravated because I was messing with them. I actually removed quite a few. So here you can see quite a bit of mud dauber nest in there also. Those are paper wasps that were hibernating in the cavity with the mud dauber nest. I was cleaning them out so that woodpeckers could use them. So I actually climbed up these trees with a vacuum cleaner and sucked up as many as I could. Could never get them all, but some of these cavities had as many as 600 or 700 paper wasps in them. And that's actually the largest aggregations of paper wasps that have been recorded in North America. There have been over 1,000 in Central America, but it was pretty interesting, so close to us. Yeah.
How do you get them out? Just-
So I have a vacuum cleaner that has a tube on it, and also have a clothes hanger to stir them around. So basically doing that. In the winter, they're not very active, at least when it's cold. Some of these days when I was doing this, it did start to warm up quite a bit, and it got a little hairy. I had to cease operations when they start flying around. You know, you're up in a tree. You don't want to aggravate them too much. And then, of course, you get other bird species. Here's some nuthatches that were in Piney Grove. Eastern bluebirds use their abandoned nests or abandoned cavities. Great crested flycatchers, other species of woodpeckers, red-bellied, flickers. Occasionally you'll get redheadeds on trees that have died that were originally RCW cavities. But this is what I'm looking for in the summer, an RCW egg. And it's always a good sight to see that first egg. Typically, RCW clutches are 3 or 4 eggs. Here's a 4 egg. That's typically a full clutch. However, sometimes you'll get more eggs. So we have a few 6-egg clutches, usually 1 or 2 every year. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not thought that RCWs will have 2 females laying in the same cavity, but the population at Piney Grove is really dense. So you'll get these clusters, like I said, up to 8 or 9 birds. That's a lot more than the rest of their range. Usually it's just a pair or 3 or 4 birds. So it seems like at Piney Grove, the females, sometimes a couple of them will lay eggs in the same nest. And not only will they lay eggs in the same nest, I found RCW eggs outside of the cavity, which isn't known to occur. Acorn woodpeckers, the other cooperative breeding woodpecker in North America, multiple females will use the same cavity. And what they will do, each female may lay 3 or 4 eggs, but the females will do egg tossing. So they'll take the other female's egg and toss it out until there's just one for all the females. And they make it so that it's equal for each other. So it seems like that might be happening here, but that's a hard thing to quantify without having a video camera or something there on it. But I found a couple eggs out on the ground right by the cavity, so something's going on there. Here's another 6-egg clutch. And this clutch in particular, you can actually see a slight difference in the egg color where the top left and the bottom 2 eggs are a little bit more gray. So I think that's probably from one female, and then the whiter eggs are probably from another. This clutch was actually 7 eggs. And again, you can see different colored eggs in there. That's hatch day. So this is the first day of life for that first little bird. It gets kind of difficult to tell how many nestlings you have right at hatch day. These guys, their necks stretch so much and they're just in a big pile. You'd like to know how many eggs actually hatched. I think there's 5 here, but it's hard to tell for sure. Here's another bigger clutch. These birds, you can start to see feather tracks on the bird's back. And this is day 4 or 5 for these birds. We can start banding birds at day 5. Here you can see the progression up to day 8. You see that bird at day 5 is still pretty naked. I prefer to wait a little longer till 7 or 8. When they're only 5 days old, they haven't grown their tarsus. Essentially this leg where I put this bone where I put the bands, it's a lot fatter also, and it's not quite as long, so it's a little bit harder to fit the bands on there. But as they grow, that leg gets a lot skinnier and a little bit longer. But once they get to that age, anywhere between 5 and 10 days, I go out there and I climb the tree, and I climb that tree using Swedish ladders. And these ladders come in 10-foot sections that fit into each other. So it's kind of like Legos. And I just drag those ladders up the tree. They look like they might be heavy, but they're really light. They're all aluminum. Some of the trees are a little more difficult to climb than others. You can see this tree has a bend in it, whereas almost all the trees surrounding it are perfectly straight. That makes it a little bit harder to climb, especially stacking the ladders onto each other. Once I'm up there, I use nooses to stick down into the cavity. And this is one of my nooses. And it's a lot like fishing. So we stick this noose down in the cavity and I can't see anything. And when I get that into the cavity, I have the tag in down here and I just pull it tight until I can feel a little resistance. And then I'll pull those nestlings out through the cavity entrance. So I never know what I'm getting. And sometimes it takes quite a while after the, yeah, go ahead.
How high is the
Average nest is between 30 and 40 feet. I've had nests as high as 65. In the past, they've been as high as 80 feet. Yeah.
Did you ever kill them with the noose?
No, I've never killed any nestlings. The nestlings are really pliable. So just like we are when we're babies, our bones aren't fully formed or hardened. Most of the time, I'll end up grabbing them by the neck and pulling them out that way. It's perfectly safe, and that's what's done throughout the RCW range. But yeah, it's you have to get used to it. It's interesting. Once I get the nestling, I take it back down and to the ground. I weigh the birds and age them, and I band them. And here's a bird. We put three bands on one leg and 2 bands on the other. You can see those 3 bands just barely fit. This is a young bird. This is probably day 5 to 6, right on the edge of being able to be banded. You can see the bands fit on there, but they're pretty tight. Here's a little bit older bird. That's about day 6. If you look at the tail there, you can see the feathers just emerging from those sheaths. That's indicative of day 6. Day 7, they're a little bit further along. This is a really nice age for banding. Day 8, the feathers are starting to come in a little bit more. This is day 9 or 10. The eyes have opened. The feathers are out a little bit more. The bird is sitting up instead of just lying prostrate. I like these kind of birds too. You feel a lot more comfortable handling them. It's not like a little baby. Here's a clutch of day 10 birds, it looks like. This is the oldest we can band nestlings. Another clutch. These are a little bit younger. Once I band them, I put them back in a little pouch, take them back up, and you can see that little popsicle stick in my mouth. I use that to help scooch them back into their cavity. And here you can see one going back. You actually set them into the cavity backwards because their natural reflex is to go backwards. They don't go forward yet. And here's the ages a little bit older. You see that day 10, that's the last day you're supposed to band them. Their feathers start coming in a lot more at this point, and that can be an issue when you're noosing nestlings out of the cavity. If you grab a feather, you risk injuring the bird by pulling that feather out or something like that. They're also a lot bigger, so it's a lot harder to actually get them through the cavity entrance. But you can see by day 15 to 17, they have quite a few feathers. These birds don't fledge until about 25 or 26 days, so there's still several days they'll spend in the cavity after that. Not all of them, yeah, go ahead.
What's the natural lifespan?
So that can vary a lot. So like a lot of birds, the majority of birds that are gonna die, they die in the first year. But once you make it past that first year, I'm not sure what the average is, but it's probably about 5 years. We've had birds that are 15, 16 years old at Piney. We currently have 1 or 2 that are that old. So they can live quite a while. They don't all fledge. We usually have a nest or maybe 2 that get predated during the season. I usually attribute it to flying squirrels, but It could be something else, a different species of woodpecker, we don't know. But this is one nest that didn't make it. Sometimes something really unusual happens. This particular nest, you can see this bird didn't make it, but it had a brother that did. So I don't know if a predator got into the cavity and one bird escaped, or one bird fledged and the other bird stayed behind and just didn't make it. But it's always interesting when you have predations. Here's older nestlings in the teens. Once they get this age, you can start to see that red cockade. So unlike adults that can hide their cockade with other feathers on the crown of their head, these birds, when they're young, they haven't grown all their feathers in. So you can sex them very easily and tell which ones are male and female. When I say very easily, it's not super easy, but you can do it. This bird here has a little bit of red there on the crown, which it's hard to see just in this picture, but when I'm looking at this at the cavity, it's moving around, it's a lot more clear. You can see those birds, their crown down there on the bottom. You can see a little bit of red there. And then this one is a lot more apparent. See that red dot? The one on the top, that's a female. It seems like a lot of the times the females are on top of the males in the cavity. I don't know, females have to fight harder or what the deal is. When females are older, they're less likely to be recruited into a cluster. Males are more often the helpers. So females will chase other females away more so than they'll chase males away. So maybe it has something to do with that, where females do have to be more aggressive. But most of the times, it's hard to sex those birds in the cavity. For instance, here, I can see I have a male and a female, but I can't see their band, so I don't know which one's male and which one's female. And that's some information that I need to know going forward. So following the breeding season, we'll go out to Piney Grove and recite every bird that we can, especially the fledglings. And when you see a fledgling, you need to see both legs so you can get the band combo, and you need to see the crown. So it can take a little bit of time. And most of the time you see the birds on the tree, it's like this. You just see a back. They don't like to show their legs, or if they do, they like to show one leg. And it always seems like it's always the same leg. They'll never show you that other leg again. But ideally, you want to see something like this. If I see that band combo, I can figure out who that bird is, and you can see that red crown very easily. So you can tell that's a male. Generally, the sex ratio of piney has been skewed towards females. I don't know if that's because of the females being more aggressive or what's behind that. That's not the case throughout the range. It's relatively even throughout the range. Piney has some interesting dynamics, like I said, with the extra egg laying, and the population at each cluster is just extra large. So different things are happening there. But throughout the years at Piney Grove, you can see both the sexes are increasing, and that's only increased since this plot was made in 2020. Last 2 years, the birds have continued to increase. Every year, you'll have a new high, it seems like. And that's the end of my presentation. I've got to thank the Nature Conservancy and DWR. They've been really instrumental in doing a lot of management out there. Fish and Wildlife also with Dismal. We've monitored the population since before Piney Grove even existed, but our role is pretty much limited to monitoring and a little bit of cavity management. The hard work is really the fires and thinning all the woods. And of course, different people contributed photos. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to go back to the translocated birds.
Okay.
My question is, do they come back, the ones who were put in and then locked in,
Mhm.
and then released the next morning by pulling the net down? Do you pull the net up next day, or that's it, just that one night? And they voluntarily go back to that spot?
Right. So during a translocation, we put the bird in, and in the morning we pull that screen off, and that's the last time. We depend on that bird to find the cavity again and return there. And if it likes the area, it will. The majority of birds, we don't know what happens to. So, and that's consistent with other places where translocations happen. Some of these birds, you're taking them from a little bit different habitat. They may not like it, so they're going to go and search for a habitat that's more to their liking. Or they may just go and find an area at Great Dismal Swamp that we're not aware of. We don't know, but even if we get 25% of the birds retained, it's still benefiting that population, because most of these birds, the young birds, they're not going to be recruited into their population wherever they're from, because it's dense populations. So we're giving them a chance to get into a new population, and if they do end up breeding there, then their genes will be passed on quite a bit, and they'll have probably a larger effect on the population as a whole. Yes.
You're actually making nests in Piney Grove in loblollies, are you not?
Yes, that's correct. So throughout the range of
Can can you repeat the question for the Zoom
Yeah.
audience?
so I was
There-
asked
there-
if,
There are two questions in the chat, if you want to look at the
oh,
chat.
okay. The last question was, do we put the cavities into loblolly pines here at Piney Grove? Because that's the dominant tree. And the answer is yes. It's almost all loblolly pine. There is some shortleaf pine at Piney Grove, which is used also. TNC and some of the people in this room have helped plant longleaf pines, which will one day be used, but that's many years away. At the Great Dismal Swamp, it's pond pine and loblolly, and both of those trees are used as well. Okay, I'm gonna check out the chat. Maybe. We're good. So I think. What's the average lifespan of a tree once an RCW drills a cavity in it? So that's pretty interesting. It depends where you are. We showed the pictures of the Great Dismal Swamp and how open it was. The trees there they get snapped much more frequently than at Piney Grove. At Piney Grove, I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference because there's enough trees there that the wind isn't knocking a lot of trees over. Unless you have a hurricane like Isabel came through. In fact, a lot of the trees from the early days, the early 2000s at Piney Grove, they will actually heal over. So once the woodpeckers stop maintaining that cavity, the tree will grow over that cavity entrance. So some of those early cavities, you can't even tell there was a cavity there, except the tree is painted and there's a tag in it. Why would flies be clustered in the cavity? All right, so the flies, I think, are just seeking a cool place in the summer or a warm place in the winter, which is what all of the wasps are doing. Inside that tree, especially trees that have a lot of sap flow, it's much warmer than the outer conditions. So it'll be cold outside. Once it starts hitting freezing temperatures, that's when these wasps move into the cavities and start hibernating. And if you get a warm spell in the winter, the wasp will come out and kind of explore. But if it gets cold again, they'll go back into there and start hibernating again. Go ahead.
Was the red heart fungus in the population of trees historically?
Yeah, red heart fungus, it occurs naturally through all pines, I believe. But maybe not all pines, but on the East Coast. It's definitely more prevalent in the pot where RCWs are present.
Will it kill the tree?
It will contribute to the tree's mortality if something else doesn't get it. It's kind of like cancer for us. We might have a heart attack and cancer will never get us, but if we're eventually, something's going to get us.
If a tree has the fungus, are you going to see fruiting body always or not always?
Not always, but so I don't know how long it takes that fruiting body to come out, and it probably depends on the tree and how fast the fungus colonizes the interior of the tree. Once that fruiting body is there, I'm not going to go back, but where that mushroom comes out, the tree will look different. So it'll have a little growth or it'll be deformed. So you can tell once it gets a mushroom on it, you can tell that it has it.
It's already too late.
Right.
Is there a particular material that the red-cockaded woodpecker uses for their nest?
Right. So the question is there a particular material that the red-cockaded woodpeckers use for their nest? What they will do is they will chip around the inside of their cavity and they'll just have the wood chips. That'll be the bed for the eggs. So, yeah. Go ahead.
What happens in the winter time? Do they stay in the clusters, they disperse, and come back in the spring? What
Right. So what happens during the non-breeding season for these guys? They typically will continue using the same exact cavity throughout the year. There are some differences in how they'll behave in the day. So during the winter, they're less likely to stick together as a cluster. So some of the birds may split off, but that will stop once you have nestlings. The whole cluster will come together and feed those nestlings and fledglings. That they'll continue feeding them after they emerge from the cavity. Go ahead.
Are there holes that they use for nesting and other holes that they're using for roosting then?
No, well, the nest cavity will be all right, so you have a breeding male and a breeding female typically. The question was, do they use one hole all the time or do they use multiple holes? The breeding male will typically create the cavity that it will be used by the nest. Once the breeding season comes on and the female is ready to lay eggs, the female will take over that cavity until the nestlings fledge. Once the nestlings fledge, the male will take that cavity back over and it'll be his again. And all the woodpeckers roost in the same tree throughout the year. The only time that they deviate from that is, like I was saying, when the male will switch with a female.
This cooperative arrangement of raising the young, is that unique to this species or?
So there are a few, as far as cooperative breeding goes, is that specific to red-cockaded woodpeckers? Throughout the world, there's quite a few species that do this. In North America, as far as woodpeckers go, acorn woodpeckers out west, they cooperatively breed, and RCWs do here. Also, scrub jays will, Florida scrub jays, and what is it? Nuthatches, brown-headed nuthatches. They operate in groups.
I mean, it would seem like a very, from an evolutionary point of view, a very advantageous thing to do. I'm just wondering why they do it.
Yeah.
Woodpeckers, for instance, don't.
Right. There's been a lot written about how this has evolved and why isn't it more widespread or why it occurs at all. So there's a lot of debate in the woodpecker community, especially the acorn woodpecker community. That's where most of the literature is. But RCWs are actually proto cooperative breeders because it's still a breeding male and female, but everybody helps feed the young. Whereas true cooperative breeders, multiple individuals will lay eggs or be fathers of the young. Right. So the advantage for sticking with a cluster despite not breeding is thought to be that you get the protection from the group, from predators. You have more eyes there looking out for predators. Eventually, helpers may become breeders, although that's not always the case. Some birds are helpers throughout their life. It's not clear, what that ultimate advantage is or why it's not more widespread. Go ahead.
Okay. Is the actual sexual act one of many females? Or one? I mean, do they know?
Oh yeah,
I mean, maybe that's why they cooperate. If there are many females inseminated by the same male.
So the question is about who is actually doing the breeding.
Yeah.
So they know so the typically two breeders, I know there's some exceptions, are the dominant birds in the group. And it's interesting watching these birds before the breeding season. They will start getting ready, and a way of bonding is they will copulate. It's not a real copulation, but they will do fake copulations with the subordinates. But the two that are the breeders, the male and the female, those are the only ones that are doing the real copulations, typically in the populations where they've looked at DNA. So they know, and it's the ones that are the bosses of the group. But,
Do they remain pairs for life or?
not for life, but it is consistent. Year to year, you will usually have the same birds. There's a lot of fighting within a group, so sometimes a bird will want to be the female, And if it's a strong enough bird, it can kick the breeding female out. And usually the breeding male will stay there with this new female, but most of the clusters will have the same pair as the year before. Go ahead.
Is the Pine Grove Preserve and Big Woods areas where the woodpeckers are they open to the public?
Piney Grove is not open to the public, but a lot of people bird the road that goes through Piney Grove. That's the easiest way to get RCWs here. Big Woods is open to the public, and they have a trail going to the cluster and some displays talking about them. And the trail has little woodpecker symbols so that people know exactly where to go. If you look on eBird or even on Google Maps, there's a little symbol that says woodpecker trail or something like that.
We've gone down Chickapin Road.
Yes.
And you can hear them. And then we just stopped the car and we got out, and the way we saw them was all the little wood chips coming down.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you'll see. You'll see flakes of pine bark coming down from where they're foraging. They can be very hard to see, even if they're right next to you. And it's really most difficult when they're right above you. But when they're up in the top of the pines, especially in the winter, a lot of times what they're doing is foraging on pine cones. And there's just so much foliage up there, they can be really difficult to see. And a lot of downy woodpeckers are up there too. So sometimes you think you see one and then you're like, oh man, that was a downy.
Is that what they eat in winter?
Yeah, they eat a lot of nuts in the winter. They'll eat arthropods. They're always looking under the bark flakes for grubs and that sort of thing. But a lot of the times you'll see them getting pine nuts.
When you find flying squirrels in the nest, do you let them stay or?
So there is some management of flying squirrels, but generally we let them be because especially a lot of times they're in these cavities that are not being used. They're not causing a lot of harm to the red-cockaded woodpeckers. And sometimes we do have predations. The population at Piney is doing pretty good. So last year we didn't have any, at least none that we are sure what happened. We had one nest with eggs and the eggs disappeared, but that pair ended up producing another nest, which was successful. So they're not being hurt necessarily by them. If they get to be a problem, then they will get removed. All right.
Well, why won't they inhabit loblolly pines by themselves?
Oh, they will, but the issue is more of the way loblolly pine forests grow up around here. They just get so thick that it's not a preferable habitat. What they like are these longleaf pine-like forests. It doesn't have to be longleaf pine, but the areas where you have longleaf pine forests, they're much more spread out, a lot fewer hardwoods. The structure of the forest is just different. They're asking, why don't the RCWs like loblolly pines naturally? Go ahead.
Have you considered moving a cluster to, for example, Zuni, where there's a large forest of lonely pines? Consider moving a cluster?
There has been talk. There's a lot of politics involved in starting new populations. There's a lot of work that goes into maintaining that habitat and monitoring it. RCWs, they asked about the potential for creating cluster or populations in other places nearby Piney Grove. Yeah.
They are Zuni Reserve has
Mhm.
a large. lonely pine.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if that was
Yeah, there is talk about starting populations in other locations in Virginia in that general area. So the RCW population has done so well that they actually got downlisted to threatened in the last few years. So they're doing pretty good. Eventually, hopefully they'll get off the endangered species list completely. There was a question on here asking if we study other birds as intensely as RCWs, and yes, we do. At the center, we study peregrine falcons, eagles. Those are the two of the big ones that we've studied for long time periods and very intensely. Osprey as well. Other species that I work with that we studied quite a bit are Ipswich sparrows, sharp-tailed sparrows, especially salt marsh sparrows. We've been in the black rail, seen quite a bit, though there's not quite as many black rails as there used to be.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you so much.
Yeah, no
That
problem.
was,
I'll stick around. I'll leave these things up here. We can look at them at the end if anybody wants to.
Thank you. That was fascinating. And I have been to Big Woods and
Yeah.
it's very successful.
Yeah, Big Woods is very accessible also.
Yeah, it's accessible and the birds flew in. Yeah, we had to give it a little bit of time, but
Yeah. They seem to range a little bit further at Big Woods
mhm,
than at Piney, but if you're there early in the morning, you'll find them.
yeah. And there's a lot of other cool birds there. There's
Yeah.
chats and whatnot going
Yeah.
on all over the place.
Breeding season in that area is really nice.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, back to Zoom.
In a minute. We've got rid of his screen. There we
Okay,
go.
there we are. Okay.
You're back.
Well, again, thank you so much. That was fascinating. And I do, there's something about going and seeing an endangered bird. I had my 12-year-old grandson with me and he said, oh, do we have to go down this road? And I said, it's just going to take a minute. I just want you to take a minute. And we heard the birds and I said, listen, and he could hear them. And then we stopped and got out of the car and I handed him binoculars and he was like, oh, can we just go home? And he got his eyes on him and he went, that's really cool. I mean, he was really touched by seeing an endangered
Good.
species. So it was a very cool experience. Okay, well, thank you again. We just have a few announcemements here. Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me? I don't know that I need to be seen. Is that all right? There, that's better. So next thing up is our field trip on Saturday. George, you want to come on up and say a couple of things about that? We've got our fingers crossed on the weather.
Yeah. Okay, get positioned right. Yeah, Saturday, we're going to Manchacomico State Park. Starting at 8 o'clock, we'll meet by at the parking lot just inside the pay station there. If anybody is interested in carpooling, we'll meet at the Colony Square Shopping Center by 7:10 for leaving by 7:15. So far, I've had one person want to carpool. The weather looks okay. Right now there might be some rain that morning, but the forecast I've looked at said it's going to stop right about the time we're planning to start birding. If something changes in that forecast by tomorrow, I'll let y'all know. But otherwise, we're going to go out there. In the future, April, we're going to Newport News Park on Saturday, April 15th. Jason Strickland is going to be leading us there. And more details on time, but probably an 8 o'clock start at Newport News Park.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, George. And on Saturday, we'll be doing a little bit of getting in and out of cars as we reposition. So if the weather is even a little bit marginal, you can pop in your car for a couple of minutes and then we'll move to the next spot. So that's Saturday. We do have our next bird walk is the 25th. And rather than have it at Newport Park, we're going to have it at Boar Hill. It's in the newsletter. And we'll send out another email about it. That's because there's a 5K race at Newport Park and too many people, too many cars, can't hear the birds, can't do anything. So that's the next bird walk. We'll return to Newport Park in April. We have our spring bird count is scheduled for Sunday, May 7th. I hope everybody can participate in that. Similar to the Christmas bird count, if you're interested, let Jim Corliss know. He'll put you on a team, or you can do your yard. You just like Christmas bird count. You can participate in a lot of ways. So hopefully everyone will participate in that. Mark your calendars. More will come about that. So the summer VSO field trip. Cheryl, do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to just announce it? Okay. It's going to be June 2nd to the 4th, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and it's going to be in Gloucester. So it's going to include Machacomico and I think Beaver Dam and a few places over there. It's gonna be a really fun weekend and close to home for us, so this is a real deal. You do need to be a VSO member to participate. The trip is free, but you do need to be a member, so you got time to renew or join. You can go on the VSO website. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Also, I'll just put it out there that another benefit of VSO is I think eventually coming up, I know it's coming up, is going to be a trip to Piney Grove. So, I'm sorry, Virginia Society of Ornithology. That's the statewide organization. And I highly encourage you to become a member. If you're not already, take a look at their website, which is probably Virginia Society of Ornithology. VSO. No. Virginia Birds. VirginiaBirds.org. If you Google Virginia Society of Ornithology, you'll find it. But take a look. It's a wonderful organization. Bill Williams is the current president. I believe Bill's on the call. They do all kinds of things. There's great field trips. I would encourage you to take a look and think about joining that. Our April meeting is going to be fun. That's when we have the student research grant recipients present their research. It's one of my favorite meetings of the year. They're so bright and enthusiastic, and it's the future. So I love hearing the kids coming. That's the April meeting, and as of now, it'll be hybrid, I believe. Another month to figure out how to do it. We do have, Mary Ellen's going to put out the newsletter. She has a deadline for Monday, March 27th to submit anything you'd like to have in the newsletter. You know what a beautiful job she does. Photos, articles, book reviews, anything you can think of, submit to Mary Ellen by the 27th. I would like to report that today at Hawkwatch, we passed the 1,000th bird. And this is the earliest we did it in ever, by about 6 days, I think. And it was a turkey vulture, but that's fine. It was kind of having a neck and neck race with an osprey. We were kind of rooting for the osprey, but turkey vulture is appropriate. So we're at 1,009, and this is what, the 15th of March. So that was pretty fun. And I don't think I have anything else. I do not. Does anybody else have?
Can I try to share a video from our recent trip to Belize?
Yes, this is awesome. So Gary and Ann just came back from Belize, and they went to Lamanai Outpost that some of us have been to. And she has a little video. So yes, please.
You may want to go to speaker, a different,
Oh, okay.
that should do it.
I think
And you're muted.
Yeah.
And take it off mute.
She can't hear you. Didn't know that.
Everybody else will
Yeah,
have to mute
You're
themselves.
muted.
Oh, and yes, everybody else, please mute yourself, including me, I guess. Should I be muted?
Let me see.
Unmute.
You're muted.
I know I am, Gary. I'm having trouble getting, I thought I could make it work and I'm not. I thought I was sharing, but now I've lost Zoom. Could you tell people I'm trying, Gary? Can you unmute?
You're trying. So Ann and Gary just had they just got back from a great trip to Belize.
Well, it was on my desktop. All right, let's see what
Oh,
happens.
that looks,
Now let me see if I can. Gary, are you seeing it?
Yes,
No?
yes. That was it.
That was great.
It was pretty.
Where were you at that point?
We were at, can you hear me?
Yes.
A Chance Hines, down by a pond. And this is the purple crowned fairy hummingbird.
Oh, my. You take a color, you take a part of the body and you go with it.
And our guide is having fun with his new camera. Our
Huh.
guide's name was Brian Culp. And we just have enjoyed traveling with him so much. We've already signed up for his August trip in Arizona called Monsoon Madness.
Ooh, monsoon in Arizona. That'll be fun. Thank you. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
It was really pretty.
Yeah. Some of us were in Belize 4 years ago. It was terrific. It's easy to get to. It's friendly. It's fabulous birds. Food is terrific. We ate black beans at every meal. It was a lot of fun.
And
And-
I think we had the same guide.
oh,
and he
yes.
was
they had-
Terrific at
they
Lamini.
had the same guide. Okay, anybody? Yes, Shirley.
Some people may be interested in the falcon nest cam that DWR is started running again.
Okay,
Their website, it's a live nest cam, it'll be on as long as the falcons are nesting up there in the high-rise in Richmond. So if you Google Fairburn falcon in Richmond, that's the only thing.
right. Thank you. Shirley's mentioning that some of you, hopefully, probably all of you, are interested in watching the falcon nest cams that are up in Richmond. DWR has. I think some of us, they're kind of time sinks in a nice way. I start watching those and I have a hard time pulling away, but it'll be up through I think through fledging. Well, I think they turned it off about 2 days before they fledge. Other than that, if you Google DWR Falcon Cam, I believe you will find it. So yeah, thanks for that, Shirley. That'll be a lot of fun. Anybody else? Anybody in the Zoom audience have anything? Speak up. No? Okay, well, I am done. So with that, I believe we're done. And thanks to everybody for coming and tuning in on Zoom. Thanks to Chance. It was awesome.